Louise Thrushwood was a modest, motherly mouse that lived within the walls of a quiet two-story home. If anything could be considered loud in her home, it would be the bellies of her grandchildren, and as the family's food provider, it was her duty to keep them quiet. Each morning, before the sunrise, she would make her way to the house's kitchen to gather crumbs, drippings, and other scraps that had been carelessly left behind by the house's larger residents. This was the Thrushwood way, to take only what was left behind while no one was around to care. The most reward with the smallest risk. It allowed her and her family to live in the house without its residents being any the wiser, and she wouldn't hear any talk of her family being a bunch of thieves. As her father always used to tell her, it's not stealing if no one wants it. Louise had never encountered any of the house's giants, but she knew they were fond of midnight snacking and less fond of cleaning up after themselves. As a result, most of what Louise scavenged consisted of various cheeses, crackers, and cookies, which made up the majority of her family's diet. She would have liked if the housemaster snacked on some more fruits and veggies now and again, but scavengers couldn't be choosers. Wielding her father's sword, which had grown far too dull for combat, she would poke each crumb, inspect it, and place it in her basket if it passed her inspection. That morning, she happened upon something truly special in the midst of rounding up a scattering of cookie crumbs. One of the crumbs in question happened to contain a fully intact chocolate chip, the food of the gods. After sniffing it to confirm it wasn't just a raisin, she held it up to gaze at its shine in the sunlight. She so badly wanted to taste it. It had been months since anyone in her family had even smelled chocolate, but she had to restrain herself. Her father had always warned her about snacking while scavenging. One thoughtless bite could quickly lead to an empty basket, and Louise couldn't bear the thought of her family going hungry because of her. After depositing the final crumb into her basket, Louise sheathed her sword and immediately headed for home. She didn't want to risk sticking around once the housemasters woke up. The less time she spent outside her mouse hole, the better. The Thrushwood home was already full of life by the time Louise returned. The triplets were playing around on the couch. Sophia was hard at work putting her ribbons on everything, and Elizabeth was sulking in the corner practicing her evil stare. Louise's grandkids all threw out a warm welcome upon their grandmother's arrival, though Louise's own kids were a little preoccupied. Adam and Abigail were sleeping like a rock and a log respectively, acting as additional props for Sophia's decorations. Meanwhile, Morgan was already doing the prep work for breakfast. She never was one to take it easy. Louise wanted to keep the little surprise she had found that morning a secret, especially from Morgan. It was difficult enough to convince her to feed her kids the cookie crumbs she scavenged, but Louise understood. It was Morgan's job as the mother to be a stick in the mud, but at the same time, Louise felt it was her duty as a grandmother to spoil her grandkids rotten. As long as she was the scavenger in the house, she'd make sure they got a little sugar in their diet. Louise did wonder how much longer that would be, though. More and more, Morgan had been hinting that Louise should consider retiring her role as the famous scavenger. Louise was already in her mid-50s, and her vision wasn't exactly as sharp as it used to be. Louise could see her point, but every time she thought about hanging up her cape, she'd remember the smiling faces of her little ones every morning she brought in a basket of goodies. It made her feel like she was doing her part, like she was a precious member of the family that couldn't be forgotten like her father was. She had a role to play, and she was the best to play it. Morgan, Adam, and Abigail had only scavenged a handful of times, and they still had a long way to go. Morgan was too cautious and couldn't find enough crumbs to fill her basket. Adam had a tendency to snack on the job, and Abby was too easily distracted by the wonders of the larger house. Louise wanted to see them improve, but she wasn't ready to let go of her title just yet. She knew she had many more adventures left in her.